Almost every form that you build needs some kind of validation. So over the next few lectures, we're going to add validation to our form. Initially, we're going to validate upon submitting the form, but later I will show you how to validate as the user types something here or when they press tab and leave an input field. In terms of the implementation, in our state object, just like we have a property that includes all the data for this form, we're also going to have a property that includes all the errors in this form. Initially, we set this to an empty object, and if there are errors in the future, we will add properties to this object like this. Username, we set this to an error message like username is required or too short or whatever. So the properties in this object map to the name of our input fields. Okay? Note that here I'm using an object instead of an array because it's much easier to find the errors for a given input field. For example, with an object, we can find the errors for the username field like this. If we had an array, then we would have to call the find method and then pass a predicate like e goes to e.name equals to username. It's really ugly. So that's why we use an object here. Now, initially we set this to an empty object. Now, in our handle submit method, here we're going to call a method like validate. So this.validate. This method will return an object that looks like this. So we get that object, errors, and then we call this.setState errors. So we'll update the state here, which will cause a re-rendering, and with this we can render error messages. Now, we can assume that if there are no errors, this method is going to return null. So we can check. If we do have any errors, we're going to return immediately, so we won't call the server. Now let's build a very basic validate method. So validate, we set this to an arrow function. For now, let's just return an object like this. Username is required. We'll come back to this shortly. Let's test the application. Now I'm going to submit the form. Here in React DevTools, let's search for our login form component. Let's take a look at the state. You can see we have errors and username is set to this error message. In the next lecture, we're going to build a basic validation function.